Topic 5: Monopolistic competition and oligopoly. Alright? In topics 2 and 3, we saw two extreme cases of market structures. We saw an extreme case of market competition, which is the perfect competition market, and the other extreme case of minimum competition, which is the monopoly, which is the case of a market when there is only one single firm. Alright, so in this topic we will examine market structures where firms have also market power but not so strong as in the case of a monopoly. That is, we are going to study intermediate case of imperfect competition. More specifically, we are going to examine three different structures of imperfect competition. First of all, we are going to study what is called a monopolistic competition market, which is a market which has both features of a perfect competitive market and a monopoly. First of all, in this market, firms can enter freely. So this is a characteristic of a perfect competitive market. And on the other hand, each firm is producing its own brand or version of a differentiated product. So this is a feature of a monopoly, because in this sense, since each firm is producing a different product, they have some kind of market power. Secondly, we are going to study markets where there is only a few firms in the market. This is what is called oligopoly, which is a market in which only a few firms compete with one another, and entry by new firms is prevented. Finally, we are going to study very briefly, because I think this is a special case of oligopoly, which is the cartel, which is a market in which some or all firms explicitly, that's the important word, explicitly collude, coordinating price and output levels to maximize joint profits. So let's start with monopolistic competition. So, a monopolistic competitive market has two important characteristics. The first one is that firms compete by selling differentiated products. So this is a market where the industries are selling a product that is differentiated. In this sense, for one reason or another, consumers view each firm's brand as different from other brands. As a result, some consumers will pay more for some brands. So this is the first characteristic of monopolistic competition. There are many examples of this kind of industries. The industry of soaps, shampoos, deodorants, bicycles, clothes. So notice that, for example, when you are going to buy a shampoo, each brand of a shampoo is different, has different features. So since, for example, the brand of shampoo Vidal Sassoon has different smell, has different properties of shampoo from, say, Deli Plus for Mercadona, consumers will be willing to pay a higher price for a shampoo of a brand Vidal Sassoon than for a shampoo of Deli Plus of Mercadona. So in this sense, when firms are selling different products, they have some kind of market power, that is, an ability to charge a price above marginal cost. The second feature is related to a perfect competitive market, and it's a free entry and exit of the market. That is, in this kind of market, it is relatively easy for new firms to enter the market with, that's important, with their own brands, and for existing firms to leave if their products become unprofitable. Okay, so since each firm is selling a differentiated product, that means that each firm has some kind of market power. So what is the kind of demand curve that these firms are going to face? Not a horizontal one like in perfect competition, but, and that's the point, a downward sloping demand, which reflects the market power each firm has in this kind of market. Okay, so notice first, let me show you that demand is downward sloping, okay, and also marginal revenue is downward sloping, okay, because firms have some kind of market power. Does this imply that these kind of firms will make large profits? The answer is no. Okay, why? Because in monopolistic competition there is also the feature that there is free entry and exit. So any large profit will attract new firms with competing brands. Then economic profits would be driven down to zero. Okay, let's see that in an equilibrium. So we are going to see first the equilibrium in the short run for a firm in a monopolistic competition model, and then we are going to see the long run equilibrium. Okay, since the demand is downward sloping, what we have is that in the short run and also in the long run, of course, the firm will produce the output where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, which is this output, right? And the price would be the point corresponding to the market demand. Okay, this would be the price that the firm would sell its products. Notice that in this case, the firm in the short run is having positive profits. Why? Because what we have here is that at this output, average cost is lower than the price. So the profits would be the difference between the price and the average cost multiplied by the number of units produced. So this area, this rectangle would represent positive profits for a monopolistic competitive firm in the short run equilibrium. Okay. However, what happens in the long run? In the long run, this positive profit in the short run will induce entry by other firms. Then, in the long run, firm will be earning zero profit. We see that, notice that in the long run also the output is the one where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost and price is equal to the average cost, so the profits would be zero. The next question we have to ask ourselves is the following: so since in a monopolistically competitive market there is free entry as in the competitive market, the question of efficiency, is also monopolistically competitive market efficient like a competitive market? Let's see the answer. But first, let's compare the long-run equilibrium of a perfectly competitive industry and a monopolistically competitive industry. Okay, in this graph, we have the long-run equilibrium of a perfect competitive firm. Okay, notice that in this case, the demand is horizontal and the competitive firm produces where price is equal to marginal cost. And also, in the long run, profits are zero because what we have here is that price is equal to the average cost, so the profits are zero. Let's move to compare this equilibrium with the equilibrium of in the long run of a monopolistic competitive firm. Okay, let's see. Here, notice two things. First, the first thing we notice that in a monopolistic competitive firm, price is greater than marginal cost. All right? This means that the price charge in monopolistic competition exceeds marginal cost. This means that the value to consumers of additional units of output exceeds the cost of producing those units. Okay, so this is a feature that implies that monopolistic competitive firm is inefficient. But there is even more. Secondly, we have that the output in a monopolistically competitive firm, the output is at a point where average cost is not minimized. Okay, so the output that would minimize average cost would be this one. But the monopolistic competitive firm produces at this point where average cost is not minimized. So this is another source of inefficiency. This inefficiency, these two features make consumers worse off. Then the next question is, so since monopolistic competition is a market structure that is inefficient compared to a perfect competitive model, should be regulated? The answer in this case is not so clear. I would think that the answer is no, probably. Why? Because there is something that we have not taken into account. There is an important benefit from monopolistic competition: product diversity. That is, the gains from product diversity can be large. I mean, it's not the same for a consumer to have only one brand of shampoo that have the diversity of 20, 30, 40 different types of shampoo. So this diversity and the gains of this diversity may be large and may outweigh the inefficiency cost from before. Also, we have to take into account that monopoly power in this case is not so big. Why? Because there is free entry. There is not only one firm, so we have enough firms competing with brands that are closely substitutes. Okay, so we have shampoo from Vidal Sassoon is different from Deli Plus, but they are close substitutes. And you have other brands that are very close substitutes from Vidal Sassoon, for example. Okay, so with this we finish the first market structure of this topic, which is monopolistic competition. We move now to examine the structure of oligopolies. Being the manager of an oligopolistic firm, it's much more complicated than in a monopoly or a competitive market. Why? Because the price, the output, any decision related for a manager in an oligopoly have important strategic considerations. Why? Because each firm must consider very carefully how its actions will affect its rivals and how its rivals are likely to act. Imagine, for instance, that you are the manager of Orange, the cell phone company, and you are considering a 10%, for example, price cut to attract new customers. So you must think carefully about how competing cell phone companies, Movistar or Vodafone, for example, will react. They might not react at all, or they might cut their prices only slightly, in which case Orange could enjoy a substantial increase in sales at the expense of its competitors. Or they might match Orange price cuts, in which case all of the firms will have more customers, but they might make lower profits because of the lower prices. Another possibility is that Movistar and Vodafone will cut their prices even more than Orange to punish Orange for rocking the boat. And this in turn might lead to a price war and to a drastic fall in profits for the entire industry. So these strategic considerations are complex. So when making decisions, each firm must weigh its competitors' reactions. But, this is important, knowing that these competitors will also weigh its competitors' reactions. And knowing that these competitors will also weigh its reaction to their decisions. So this is a complex process. And all this process is dynamic and evolves over time. So the important point is that each manager must assume that their competitors are as rationally intelligent as they are. And they must put themselves in their competitors' place and consider how they would react. Okay? So in general, in oligopolistic markets, the products might or may not be differentiated. That is not the important point, okay? They can be homogeneous or heterogeneous, okay? What matters is that in this kind of market, we have only a few firms, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever, okay? So these few firms account for most or all of total productions. Why happens that? Because in some oligopolistic markets, some of or all firms earn substantial profits because they are barriers to entry and make impossible or very difficult for new firms to enter the market. Okay? And oligopoly is a prevalent form of market structure. There are many examples in many industries that are close to an oligopolistic market. So, what we are interested is in knowing the price and output that will prevail in equilibrium. For example, we know that in a perfect competitive market, in equilibrium, price is equal to marginal cost, and we know that in a monopoly output that prevails in equilibrium is the one where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. But there is a major difference between the former market structure and the oligopoly. In the former ones, each firm could take price on market demand as given and largely ignore its competitors. But in an oligopolistic market, a manager cannot do that. The price and output set by a firm must be based partly on strategic considerations regarding the behavior of its competitors. So now, in this new framework, the question is, how can we figure out what the market price and output will be in equilibrium? Notice that now the profits of any decision depends on the reaction of your competitors, which would not happen or did not happen in the former case of market structures, in perfect competition and monopoly. Okay? And remember that we described an equilibrium in competitive and monopolistic market as the situation in which firms are maximizing profits. That is, doing the best they can and have no reason to change their price or output. So we can apply the same principle in an oligopoly, but taking into account the strategic considerations. This is what we call a Nash equilibrium. Okay? A Nash equilibrium is a situation or a result in which each firm will want to do the best it can, given, that's the important point, what its competitors are doing. But at the same time, these competitors will do the best they can, given what the firm is doing. In other words, a Nash equilibrium is a combination of decisions of each firm in which at the same time and for every firm, all of the firms in the market, in this market, each firm is doing the best it can given the decisions of your competitors. Okay? From now on, to simplify, we will consider a special case of an oligopoly, which is a duopoly. Okay, which is a market in which two firms compete with each other. So we will start with what is called the Cournot model. Okay, remember that we are only focusing in duopolies, that is markets with two firms. Suppose we have two firms that produce an homogeneous good, that is exactly the same good. Okay, you can differentiate the good from one firm from the other. Suppose also that both firms know the market demand. Each firm, we are going to assume that must decide how much to produce. Okay, so the decision here in the Cournot duopoly is output. And the important point is that the two firms make the decision at the same time. An example, you can imagine farmers deciding how much of a perishable crop, for example, oranges or apples, to pick each morning and send to a market. Okay? Let's start the analysis with a very, very, very simple example. Okay? Suppose these two firms face the following linear market demand. Secondly, these two firms have the same marginal cost, and we suppose to simplify that this marginal cost is equal to 0. And each firm can only decide to produce either 7.5 units, 10 or 15 units. Okay? In this matrix, what is called a profit matrix or payoff matrix, we have profits for each possible situation. Okay, so here, for example, this row represents when firm 1 decides to produce 7.5, and this column represents when firm 2 decides to produce 7.5. And what we have inside this cell is the profits corresponding to firm 1. Okay, so the profits before the dot are the profits for firm 1, and the profits after the dot are the profits for firm 2. So the interpretation of that is that if firm 1 decides to produce 7.5 and firm 2 decides to produce 7.5, profits would be 112.5 for each firm. Okay? Or for example, this cell. This cell represents the situation where firm 1 decides to produce 15 units and firm 2 decides to produce 7.5 units. Okay? In this case, profits for firm 1 would be 112.5 and 56.25 for firm 2. Alright? Clear? Then, what's the problem here? The problem here is that, let me, wait one moment. The problem here is that when firm 1 is choosing, for example, 15 units, says that firm 1 wants to produce 15 units. He does not know how much firm 2 is going to produce. That is, he does not know if firm 2 is going to produce 7.5, 10, or 15. Okay? And the same applies for firm 2. Firm 2, when makes a decision, does not know for sure what is the output that firm 1 is going to produce. Then, what's important here is which is the expectation of each firm about what the other firm is going to produce. For that, we obtain what is called the best response for firm 1. Okay? Let's put, for example, in the shoes of firm 1. Okay? Suppose that firm 1 thinks that firm 2 is going to produce 7.5 units. Okay? So, what would be the best response for firm 1? If firm 1 produces 7.5, the profits would be 112.5. If produces 10, the profits would be 125.93. And if it produces 15 units, the profits would be 112.5. So notice that if firm 1 thinks that firm 2 is going to produce 7.5, the best response for firm 1 is to produce 10 because it's the response that yields the maximum profits for firm 2. Okay, so we can, in this case, build what is called a best response function for each firm. Okay, so we have that if firm 1 thinks that firm 2 is going to produce 7.5, the best response is to produce 10. If firm 1 thinks that firm 2 is going to produce 10, the best response is to produce 10. And if firm 2 thinks that firm 2 is going to produce 15, the best response is to produce 7.5. In the same, we can do the same for firm 2. We can respond the best response for any expectation that firm 2 makes about what is going to do firm 1. Okay? So, if both managers are rational, it is logical that each firm is doing the best it can given what its competitors are doing. So what is the only combination of output in which both firms are making the best they can given what the other firm is doing? So the would be the only point that holds that is the one where firm 1 produces 10 and firm 2 produces 10. This is what is called a Cournot-Nash equilibrium. Okay? So, when both firms produce 10 units, they both are at the same time maximizing profits given what the other firm is doing. So, okay? Let's do the same, but instead of assuming 3 levels of output, suppose that there is a continuum of output choices. That is, each firm can produce any output. Alright? So now we can obtain the best response of each firm in the following way. Okay, we obtain first for each firm, we obtain, for example, for firm 1, we can obtain the total revenue, which is price multiplied by output. We compute marginal revenue by making the derivative total revenue with respect to output, and setting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. Remember that marginal cost we have assumed that is 0. Okay, so setting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost for firm 1 and isolating Q1, we obtain this expression. This expression is the equivalent to the best response function before, and it's called the first one reaction curve or function, and is the same as a best response function. Notice that this best response function depends on the output of firm 2. What is telling this expression? This expression is telling us for any output that firm 2 is going to produce, the output for firm 1 that maximizes profits. By the same calculation, we can do the same for firm 2. That is, we can compute firm 2 reaction curve, which depends on the output of firm 1. So notice that we have here two equations with two unknowns. Okay, solving for this equation, we have that the output that each firm is going to produce is 10, and total output of the industry is 20. Okay. So the point where we have solved before, where each firm produces 10, is called the Cournot-Nash equilibrium. Okay, and we have explained. I have explained before. This would be what each firm would produce if they compete against each other. But there is another possibility. There is the possibility that firms, instead of competing against each other, they collude. Okay? Then they would set their outputs to maximize total profit. When I talk about total profit, is total profits of the industry as a whole. I mean, they make the decisions to maximize profits of the industry. They act as if they were a monopoly. Okay, so the output of the industry would be the same that a monopolist would choose, because it's the output that maximizes the profits of the industry. Okay, so we obtain. So here, basically, what we have, if we solve a monopoly solution, that is total revenue, we obtain marginal revenue, and we set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, but marginal revenue of the industry. So total profit of the industry is maximized at 15. So when both firms, the sum of what both firms produce is equal to 15, they are maximizing the profits of the industry, and this is called the collusion function or the collusion curve. If the firms agree to share profits equally, which would be logical decisions, each one would produce 7.5 instead of 10. So if they decide to cooperate, to collude, they will produce 7.5 instead of 10. Okay? Let's see that in a graph. Okay? Okay, in this graph, first, I want you to see we have firm 1's reaction curve and firm 2's reaction curve. Remember that firm 1's reaction curve tells us, each point here tells us for any output. Here we have, in this axis, the output produced by firm 1, and in this axis, the output produced by firm 2. So firm 1's reaction curve is telling firm 1 for any output produced by firm 2, that is here, which is the output that maximizes profit for firm 1. For example, what it's telling is that, for example, if firm 2 decides to produce 15 units, the optimal output, the output that maximizes profit for firm 1 will be 0. On the other hand, if firm 2 decides to produce 0, okay? The output that would maximize profit for firm 1 would be 15. Okay. And the same, we can do the same analysis or the same interpretation for firm 2's reaction curve. Okay, firm 2 reaction curves tells firm 2 what is the output that maximizes profit for any output chosen by firm 1. Okay, so what is the only point in which both firms maximize profits at the same time? So the only point that holds that is the one where both firms' reactions intersect. So it would be the point where that we have obtained before mathematically, where firm 2 produces 10 and firm 1 produces 10. Okay, right? Now, what happens if they decide to collude or to cooperate? If they decide to collude or to cooperate, the maximum output that they will going to produce between both of them is 15. So a possible combination is that firm 1 produces 15 units and firm 2 produces 0. And the second possibility is that firm 2 produces 15 units and firm 1 produces 0 units. Between these both extreme cases, any combination is possible. Which would be the logical combination? The logical combination is that both firms split the profits and they produce each one 7.5 units. Okay, 7.5. So another possibility is to compare this with a competitive equilibrium. In a competitive equilibrium, we can obtain the competitive equilibrium would be where the price is equal to the marginal cost. And notice that in the competitive equilibrium, each firm would produce 15. So we have that if the firms cooperate or collude, they would produce 7.5. If they compete against each other, they would produce 10. And if they were in a competitive equilibrium, they would produce 15 each one. So notice that the output produced by each firm, if they cooperate, or the monopoly case, is lower than in the oligopoly case if they compete against each other in Cournot, and lower than in the perfect competitive market. So that is, the output produced by the industry in the Cournot equilibrium is higher than the one chosen by a monopolist. What is the intuition behind that? The intuition behind that is that in the Cournot model, there is a negative externality between firms. When, for example, firm 1 chooses its output, takes into account the negative effect of the change of price on its own output rather than in the industry output. Therefore, each firm will choose an output that exceeds the optimal output from the industry point of view. Consequently, market price will be lower than the monopoly price, and the aggregate profit will be also lower than the monopoly profit. And on the other hand, the output produced by the industry in the Cournot equilibrium is lower than the one chosen by a competitive industry. That is, the price in Cournot is greater than the marginal cost. What would happen if the number of firms in Cournot increases? That is, if instead of 2 firms we have more firms. As the number of firms as the number of firms increase, the output in curve node that each firm produces in curve node tends to decrease, right? Furthermore, as the number of firms tends to infinity, price will be closer or will be equal to marginal cost. That is, as the number of firms increase, this model or this kind of market will resemble or will be the same as a perfect competitive market. The intuition is straightforward. As the number of firms increases, each firm has a lower influence on the price, and as the number of firms is sufficiently high, they act as if the price were fixed. Let's see what happens if one of the firms can set its output first. Okay? There are two questions here. Is it advantageous to go first? That will be the first question to answer. And the second question we want to answer is how much each firm will produce. Okay? So, continuing with our example, where both firms have zero marginal cost and the same linear market demand, we first start assuming that each firm can only produce 7.5, 10, or 15 units. So in the Stackelberg model, we have that one of the firms set its output before. So suppose firm 1 sets its output first, and then firm 2, after observing firm 1's output, makes its output decision. Okay, so that's important. In setting output, firm 1 must try to take into account how firm 2 will react once it observes its output decision. Okay, we can represent that decision as what is called a decision tree. Notice that we have firm 1 is the one that makes a decision and has three possible decisions: to produce 7.5, to produce 10, and to produce 15. Then, after observing the decision of firm 1, is firm 2 which is making the decision. Okay? And the decision is to produce 7.5, 10, or 15 in each case. Okay? And here, at the end of the tree, we have first, for each possible combination of outputs, first profits for firm 1 and profits then from firm 2. So, for example, if firm 1 decides to produce 7.5 and firm 2 decides to produce 7.5, the profits will be 112.5 for firm 1 and 112.5 for firm 2, and this for each case. All right. So we can try to see what is the result by what is called backward induction. That is, first we look at firm 2's decision. So firm 2, if it has to decide between 7.5, 10, or 15, decides 10 because 125 is greater than 112.5 and 112.5. If firm 1 produces 10, firm 2 will produce 10 because 100 is greater than 75 and greater than 93.75. And finally, if firm 1 decides to produce 15, it will decide to produce 7.5 because 56.725 is greater than 50 and 0. Then firm 1 anticipates that if produces 7.5, firm 2 is going to choose 10 and its profits will be 93.75. If it produces 10, firm 2 is going to choose 10 and its profit will be 100. And if it produces 15, firm 2 is going to produce 7.5 and its profit will be 112.5. So firm 1 is going to decide to produce 15, and then firm 2 is going to react by choosing to produce 7.5. For a continuum of output choices, we could begin with firm 2. okay? Because it makes its output decision after firm 1. It takes firm 1's output as fixed. So firms 2 reaction curve is the same as in Cournot. But the difference now is that since firm 1 takes into account what is the firms 2 reaction curve, what we do is to replace the reaction curve of firm 2 into firm 1's revenue here. Okay? Then, in that way, we obtain firm 1's revenue only as a function of its own output. We compute marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, which is 0, and what we obtain is that firm 1 produces 15 and firm 2 produces 7.5. That is, that we conclude that firm 1 produces more than in Cournot and firm 2 produces less than Cournot. So comparing stack level with Cournot, going first gives firm 1 an advantage. So this may seem or seems counterintuitive. I mean, it is disadvantageous to announce your output first. So why going first gives an strategic advantage? The reason is the following. The reason is that announcing first creates a commitment. No matter what your competitor does, your output will be large. Then to maximize profit, your competitor must take your output, your large output level as given, and set a low level of output for itself. Okay, so we can see that in the graph. Notice that what is doing firm 1 is from all points in the reaction curve of firm 2, firm 1 chooses the point which yields the highest profit for firm 1, which is this one. Okay? Cournot and Stackelberg models are alternative representations of oligopolistic behavior. Then the question is, which model is more appropriate? The answer depends on the industry. For an industry composed of roughly similar firms, none of which has a strong operational advantage or leadership position, the Cournot model is probably the more appropriate. On the other hand, some industries are dominated by a large firm that usually takes the lead in introducing new products or setting the price. For example, in tablets market, Apple would be the leader and the others the followers. Let's move now to another type of oligopoly model or duopoly, because we are continuing to assume that there are two firms, but now we assume that firms compete only by setting prices instead of quantities. Then suppose again that firms produce the same homogeneous good and make their decisions at the same time. But in this case, however, the firms choose prices instead of quantities. Then let's use the same linear market demand as in the Cournot case, but now, however, we will assume that both firms have, instead of a marginal cost of 0, a marginal cost of 3. All right? As an exercise, you can obtain that the Cournot equilibrium for this duopoly is to produce 9. Okay. Also, in the Cournot equilibrium, the price will be 12, and each firm would make a profit of 81. But what happens if both firms choose simultaneously price instead of quantity? Note that because the good is homogeneous, consumers will purchase only from the lowest price seller. Thus, if the two firms charge different prices, the lower price firm will supply the entire market and the higher price firm will sell nothing. If both firms charge the same price, consumers will be indifferent as to which firm they buy from, and each firm will supply half the market. The Nash equilibrium in this case will be the competitive outcome where both firms set price equal to cost, that is, to marginal cost. That is the one where the price is equal to 3. Industry output in this case would be 27, and the output of each firm would be 13.5, and each firm would make 0 profit. To check that this outcome is a Nash equilibrium, ask whether either firm would have an incentive to change its price. Suppose, for example, that firm 1 raises its price. It would then lose all its sales to firm 2, and therefore be no better off. If, instead, lower its price, it would be worse off. Therefore, firm 1 has no incentive to deviate. In the same way for firm 2. Each firm is simultaneously doing the best it can to maximize profit, given what its competitor is doing. But the other question is there any other Nash equilibrium? For example, the situation in which both firms charge the same price but a higher one, for example, price equal to 5 for both firms. Has any firm incentives to deviate? If firm 1 sets price equal to 4, for example, deviates to set a lower price to 4, captures the whole market and makes more profit. So this is not a Nash equilibrium. The result is also called the Bertrand paradox, because we only need 2 firms to reestablish competition. That is, the Bertrand model predicts that distortion arising from the exercise of market power are limited to the special case of monopoly. And also it's a paradox because it's hard to believe that an industry with a small number of firms, they will manipulate prices to obtain higher profits. But the result is just a consequence of some strong assumptions. For example, homogeneous goods. What happens if we suppose that in the Bertrand model the products are differentiated? So suppose now that each of the 2 duopolies has fixed cost of 20 and 0 marginal cost. Okay. Notice that each firm's demand depends on the price of the other firm. Okay, they are substitutes. So we can obtain firm's reaction functions for each firm, and we obtain in this case each firm reaction curve, which depends on the price of the other firm, and we obtain in this case that the Nash equilibrium, each firm will be charging a price of 4 and earning a profit of 12. Okay, so the conclusion is that in the presence of product differentiation, equilibrium prices will be above the competitive level. However, this price will be still below the one firm would charge if they collude, at the monopoly's case. So, which model represents better a market and an oligopoly market? We can think that Cournot quantity competition is more a model that captures more long-run competition through capacity choice. And Bertrand price competition models more the short-run competition in an oligopoly market. Okay. So, a Nash equilibrium is a non-cooperative equilibrium. Each firm makes the decisions that give it the highest possible profit given the action of the competitors. Okay. And the resulting profit from a Nash equilibrium is lower than the one if firms colluded, that is, if they cooperate. So the question is why firms don't collude, all right? The first answer would be because explicit collusion is illegal. Okay, it's illegal and it's not allowed by government and competition authorities. However, there is still the possibility of implicit collusion. One firm could set the collusion price and expect that the other do the same. What is the problem of that? This has some strategic problems. The first is that your competitor probably won't choose to set price at the collusive level. Why not? Because your competitor would do better by choosing a lower price, even if it knew that you were going to set price at the collusive level. Suppose that you charge a price, you are firm 1 and you charge a price of 6. Notice that firm 2, by setting the price of 4 and no colluding, it would obtain profits of 20, while colluding with you and setting a price of 6 would obtain a price of 6. So it's not in the self-interest of firm 2 to collude with you. Okay? This example belongs to a class of strategic situations called a prisoner's dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma is a situation that you can see in the book and you can see in other places. It's a paradigmatic example of that self-interest, rational behavior not leads always to a social optimal result. That is, that the invisible hand result from Adam Smith fails. So in a typical prisoner's dilemma, cooperation between individuals leads to deficient outcome. However, each individual seeking their own interest leads to the inefficient outcome in which neither player cooperates. Okay? One way to view the outcome of the prisoner's dilemma is that in seeking to maximize his own payoff, each firm has a negative effect on the other firm. And the typical example of the prisoner's dilemma is the following. We have two prisoners that have been accused of collaborating in a crime. They are in separate jail cells and cannot communicate with each other. Each has been asked to confess. If both prisoners confess, each will receive a prison term of 5 years. Okay? If neither confesses, the prosecution case will be difficult to make, so the prisoners can expect to plea bargain and receive terms of 2 years. On the other hand, if one prisoner confesses and the other does not, the one who confesses will receive a term of only 1 year, while the other will go to prison for 10 years. Our prisoners face a dilemma. If they could agree not to confess, then each would go to jail for only 2 years. But they can talk to each other. And even if they could, can they trust each other? For example, if prisoner A does not confess, he risks being taken advantage by his former accomplice. After all, no matter what prisoner A does, prisoner B comes out ahead by confessing. So likewise, and prisoner A comes out ahead by confessing. So prisoner B must worry that by not confessing, she will be taken advantage of. So therefore, both prisoners will probably confess and go to jail for 5 years. So this is the probability result. 5 years of prison. Oligopolistic firms often find themselves in a prisoner's dilemma. They must decide whether to compete aggressively, attempting to capture larger share of the market at the competitor's expense, or to cooperate and compete more passively, coexisting with their competitors and setting for their current market share. If the firms compete passively, setting high prices and limiting output, they will make higher profits than if they compete aggressively. So like our prisoners, however, each firm has an incentive to deviate and undercut its competitors. And each knows that its competitors have the same incentive. So the next question is, can firms find a way out of this dilemma so that oligopolistic coordination and cooperation could prevail? The answer is yes, because we observe collusion in real life. In real life, what happens is most times firms play what is called a repeated games. That is, they make the same decision with the same competitors over time. So how does repetition change the likely outcome of the game? Suppose that you are firm 1 in the prisoner's dilemma. If you only compete with the other firm for one time, both will charge a lower price. But suppose that this game or this situation is repeated over and over again. Should you play this game differently? Suppose that you are the manager of Firm 1 and you follow you follow this strategy. You start out with a high price, which you maintain as long as as your competitor continues to cooperate and also charges a high price. As soon as your competitor lowers its price, you will follow in the next period by lowering your price. Okay, this is what is called a tit for tat strategy. Suppose that in 1 month my competitor sets a low price and undercuts me. In that month we will make a large profit, but my competitor knows that the following month I will set a low price. So that this profit will fall and will remain low as long as we both continue to charge a low price. The cumulative loss of profit that results must outweigh any short-term gain that happened during the first month of our undercutting. So the important point in a repeated game is that it allows the possibility of punishing your opponent. If we agree to collude and you deviate, I punish you by setting a low price. And this is not possible in a one-shot interaction. Finally, the cartel is a situation where producers explicitly agree to cooperate in setting prices on all levels. Okay, an example would be the OPEC cartel. And with this, I finish topic 5, which is the last topic that this year goes to the final exam. Okay, so there is no topic 6 for exam this year. So good luck and take care, please.